Komaruddin Hidayat, part 18. I want to give information to the participant that first, please use the same Zoom account name as the same registered in the Urban Sufism class registration. And also in order to avoid the risk of interference from intruders during the discussion. And also please ensure the microphone is muted while the class is running. The discussion session start after the discussion finish talking, and participant can ask questions by typing them in the chat column. And also due to the limit time, we apologize if not all questions could be read and responded by the speakers. Okay, tonight we are going to discuss Dr. Mustafa Akyol's book with title Reopening Muslim Minds, A Return to Reason, Freedom and Tolerance. The book tells us how important for restoring reason, freedom and tolerance into Muslim minds. As we know that right now, radicalism, intolerance, and lagging behind in science have been quite a big problem in the Muslim world now, whereas Muslims managed the headmost civilization in the past. The book consists of 14 chapters, and many of them contested questions within the Muslim world. Mustafa argued that modern values are indeed consistent the best Islamic tradition. He explained why Muslims lost their universality, science, even moral, and how to recall those spirit in the recent days. Tonight we are so happy to have him with us tonight, and also together with us there is Pak Profesor Komaruddin Hidayat. Assalamualaikum Pak Prof Komaruddin.
Waalaikumsalam.
And also Prof Nina Nurmila. Assalamualaikum Prof Nina.
Waalaikumsalam.
Okay, and Bapak Muhamad Ali PhD. Pak Ali, Assalamualaikum Pak.
Waalaikumsalam.
Okay, and the last, not the least, Bapak Philps J Vermonte PhD. Assalamualaikum. Okay, I read the book, and also there are very interesting opening in introduction. Yeah, the title is "A Night with the Religion Police." I think the story is talking about when Pak Mustafa Akyol researched in Malaysia, and then story when he did research over there, and then there is title "A Night with the Religion Police" in Malaysia. I think this is something interesting as well. And also I tried to read in glance about the women issue as well. Is there are very progressive idea in that book. Okay, I will introduce our guest tonight, Dr. Mustafa Akyol. She is a senior fellow at the Cato Institute Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity, where he focuses on the intersection of public policy, Islam, and modernity. Since 2013, he has also been a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times, covering politics and religion in the Muslim world. He is the author of Reopening Muslim Minds, A Return to Reason, Freedom and Tolerance, which is a very new book in 2021. And in 2017, he also wrote the book titled The Islamic Jesus, How the King of the Jews Became a Prophet of the Muslim. And 2011, he also wrote the book Islam Without Extremes, A Muslim Case for Liberty. So I think we are going to listen the presentation from Dr. Mustafa Akyol, and time for you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Qibtiyah, is that correct? And
yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you, for organizing this. Professor Hidayat, Adi, who has been very helpful in organizing this, and I'm honored by this opportunity to speak to a broad audience in Indonesia. I should say that I'm not a doctor. I take that as a compliment from you. I didn't have the time for PhD actually, but because I've been engaged in popular writing, I'm more coming from a journalistic but academic quasi background. And I have been a writer in Turkey, and one thing I've been trying to do with my writing is Turkey has its own Islamic tradition with a lot of actually interesting insights by Turkish theologians, academics. But most of them was in Turkish, so I sometimes try to bring those insights to the broader attention of the Ummah, because I believe we are at a time in the Islamic world, in the history of the Islamic civilization, that we need new ideas rooted in our tradition, of course, not new ideas from nowhere, but we need to articulate new ideas. And I believe that every era in the Islamic civilization had its own challenges. I mean, there was a time that the Mongols were at the gates, so you had to defend Baghdad, so that was a different time. But today, intellectually, we have major issues that in the Muslim world that we have to face. And this might be one of the most challenging eras, I think, of our Ummah. So let me try to explain what I argue in my new book. And I'll begin with the incident that you kind of referred to, which is the incident in Malaysia, a night with the religion police. Now, I'll try to explain what was the issue there, which actually brings an introduction to the broader discussion that I have in the book. First of all, I never had the chance to visit Indonesia, although I love the country from afar. But your neighbor, Malaysia, is a place that I frequently visited. I visited Malaysia, I think, 6 times in 12 years. Because I was invited for events there. And most of the time, those events were organized by the Islamic Renaissance Front, based in Kuala Lumpur. And they published my book in Malay as well. And in 2017, September, they invited me for a series of events to be held in Kuala Lumpur. And these were conferences, and the first one went well. In the second one, we were addressing a very sensitive topic, very sensitive, especially in Malaysia, which is the issue of ridda, as we would call it in Arabic, or apostasy, or publicly giving up your faith and accepting another faith, or becoming an atheist or something. Now, I gave this conference a 30-minute lecture with scholars around me who also commented on the idea. I said, listen, I know in Malaysia, apostasy is considered as a crime. And, if you become an apostate, you go to a rehabilitation center. And in Saudi Arabia or in Iran, it is a much harsher punishment. I mean, people can be given death penalty or they certainly go to jail. And I said, we Muslims have to think this issue. I began with with reasserting the Quranic principle, La ikraha fi din, which means no compulsion in religion. And I also said, yes, it is true that in our fiqh, in our jurisprudence, apostasy was seen as a crime, but this doesn't come from the Quran. It comes from a hadith whose authenticity can be discussed, as I do in the book. It's ahad hadith. It's hadith with just one narrator, which at least some Muslims have always looked with certain suspicions, especially the Hanafi tradition. And more importantly, yes, medievalist jurists, Muslim jurists, considered apostasy as a serious crime because at that time, apostasy had a very political meaning. Changing your religion could easily mean joining the enemy that you were fighting with, because your religious allegiance and your political allegiance was the same thing. That's why, for example, the Hanafis, when they punished apostates, they gave the death penalty only for males, not for females, which gives you an idea that because they realized that the females are not soldiers in medieval warfare. So there's a political sense to this, which doesn't exist anymore. Today, if somebody changes his religion, it doesn't become a soldier of the army that you're fighting with. It's a matter of freedom of conscience. And I added at the end that, hey, listen, I'm a Muslim. We don't want to see anybody losing their faith. I mean, it's not something we want to promote. We don't want to see anybody leaving the fold of Islam, and we don't think it's good for his hereafter, akhirah. But if that happens, should we really use coercion or not? Is it effective and is it right? And I said my answer, based on the scholarship I read, is no. And I said at the end, religion is not really something we can police. If somebody doesn't believe in Islam, if you go and tell that person, come back, believe it again, otherwise we'll punish you, we'll jail you, you cannot make that person a mu'min. You can make him a munafiq, like at best, a hypocrite. So by coercion, you can only achieve hypocrisy. So I believe I said religion should not be policed. The event was very welcome, and a lot of people applauded, and they were leaving. Then 5 men walked in, and they said, "Are you Mustafa Akyol?" I said, "Yes." And they said, "You said religion cannot be policed." I said, "Yes." They said, "Good, we are the religion police." So they were officers of Javi. I don't know if you're familiar. In Malaysia, there's this police department connected to the official religious department. And they questioned me that night, but let me go. But next morning, they summoned me to their headquarters. And my host said, you should better leave the country. We can deal with this through lawyers. I followed that advice, and I went to the airport. But at the airport, when I gave my passport to the security officers, they stopped me there, and I was arrested at the airport. And I was told that I waited at the airport for several hours, and the religious police Jabi officers came, and they said I violated the law that bans teaching Islam without tawliya, or permission from the state, and the punishment is 2 years in jail. So, and the next day I was going to be taken to the court, and I was arrested that night. I spent the night in the Javi headquarters, in a cell, and next morning I was taken to the court, and I was questioned about my crime, and then they asked me, like, did you really quote "La ikraha fi din," no compulsion in religion? I said, yes, I did. I mean, I didn't think it's a problem, right? It's a verse from the Quran. Every Muslim can quote it anywhere. No, they were really unhappy with that, and at the end, they let me go, and there is some diplomacy behind that I explain in the book, so I'm not going to get in there. So I was lucky, and I appreciate the fact that they let me go. But once they let me go, I was curious about what happened, and because they kept me asking, why did you quote "La ikraha fi din"? I said, no compulsion in religion, that part of the verse Baqarah 256. Which has become a motto of more liberty-minded Muslims, of course, in the modern era. They kept me asking why, and I said, like, what is their problem? And I wondered, how are they interpreting that? How are they translating the verse? And because I've seen a little trick in some publications printed in Saudi Arabia, and I suspected if they do the same thing, and I realized, yes, they do the same thing. So I'll show you how it works, actually. I went into the JAKIM website. JAKIM is of course, religious institution that the religious police is tied to, the official religious ministry. So there, the English translation of the verse, "There's no compulsion in religion," comes a little differently. Now, I hope I can share a screen here, and I want to share it if I can. No.
Yes,
no.
you can share screen.
Okay. Basic. Okay, I can't share the screen, but then I will explain to you. In the website of JAKIM, when they write, "There is no compulsion in religion," they add a little parentheses. There is no compulsion in religion while becoming a Muslim, right? So, and the publications in Saudi Arabia say the same thing. Some of them. I mean, there is Sahih International. It also says, "There shall be no compulsion in the acceptance of the religion." So the point is, there's no compulsion while only entering Islam. I mean, that's not in the verse. They insert that in the verse. Why they make that little insertion? Because if you say there is no compulsion in religion, it means you can enter Islam freely and you can exit Islam freely. And while you are practicing Islam, it is your conscience. You're free to practice Islam in the way you understand it. But if you are free only in entering Islam, but you cannot get out, they want to make that point very clear. So they want to make sure that the statement "La ikraha fi din," no compulsion in religion, is limited in its meaning. Now, why is this? And of course, it makes a big difference. I mean, it makes a huge difference. And it actually gives religious police the authority that it is It has. I mean, you should check people if they are fasting in Ramadan or not. If they eat on the streets, you can punish them for that. So there's compulsion there in the religion. Now, I use this story to begin my book, and I say, listen, we have something to think here as Muslims. And I ask, why are they doing this? Why are they having this little insertion in the verse? Well, they're not doing this out of nothing. They rely on our traditional fiqh, that is jurisprudence, which, yes, considers apostasy as a crime. So the no compulsion in religion is limited there, which also considers what I call religious policing a necessary thing. In other words, as a Muslim, you're obliged to pray 5 times a day. And there are medieval jurisprudential texts which says that if you don't do your prayers, if you don't go to the mosque, or if you do something haram that is on the street, you will be punished for that. There is religious policing. That's called hisbah. So those interpretations are there. And I say, let's question these, because I have a problem with these. Why do I have a problem with these? Because I've been observing the Muslim world, living in the Muslim world, thinking about the Muslim world for 3 decades now, because I see that these things are bringing big problems to us. What are the problems? First of all, the ban on apostasy, ridda, which doesn't happen every day. I mean, not that Muslims go out and saying we are non-Muslims all the time. It's a rare occurrence, but this is a major human rights issue. Whenever somebody, a convert to Christianity, gets arrested or jailed in Iran or Saudi Arabia or somewhere in the world, it enrages a lot of people, because consider if converts from Christianity to Islam were punished for apostasy from Christianity. There are many converts to Islam, like new Muslims. We say, welcome to our ummah, brother, sister, you are now a part of our community. We welcome them. Imagine that they were jailed for converting into Islam. So that kind of outrage that takes place in the world. Moreover, this ban on apostasy is also used not to punish real apostates, but also throw takfir on fellow Muslims and then to punish them. We have seen examples of Muslim intellectuals declared kafir because of their interpretations. They're not non-Muslims. They're not actually murtads. They're not apostates. But they differ from the orthodoxy on a few issues. And they're kafir and they are targeted. In 1985, Mahmud Taha was executed in Sudan. He was an Islamic scholar. And his point was that the traditional abrogation, naskh idea, was wrong. And actually the Meccan verses that were abrogated by some jurists represent the universal values of Islam. That was all he said. The Sudanese regime at the time declared him as a murtad, and they executed him publicly by hanging. He went to the gallows by praying. I mean, he was a pious Muslim. Scholars like Fazlur Rahman in Pakistan, he's one of the towering minds, I think, of Islam in the 20th century. He was declared by kafir, by murtad, by some radical groups, and he had to leave Pakistan and he had to teach the United States. Nasr Abu Zaid in Egypt, because of his rereading of the Quran more contextually, he was still also declared. So this is a problem in the sense that when you use coercion to impose one view of religion, you sometimes punish innocent people for their honest convictions, and also you also block new thinking in Islam, because if something is kufr and then you punish it with any idea, I think that has a deafening effect on Muslim society. The other problem is this idea of coercion, not just apostasy, but also religious policing, leads to hypocrisy. I mean, what can we achieve if we monitor people if they are really pious? This is very clear in Iran. In Iran, since the beginning of the Islamic Republic in 1979, they are employed, there are forces like the Revolutionary Guards or the Basij as they call, which monitor people. I mean, are women wearing hijab? I mean, if the woman is not wearing hijab, these people go and chase her in the streets and punish her. If you drink alcohol, you're severely punished. Now, did this make Iranian society more pious? A lot of observers will tell you, no, it made Iranian society hypocritical. People, yes, can't drink on the street, but a lot of people drink at home. Actually, it is famous in Turkey that Iranians come to Turkey to drink alcohol and go very, uncontrolled because they don't have it, in Iran. So it leads to hypocrisy. It doesn't lead to real piety. And by the way, I should say that I'm very much against the laws that ban hijab too, which takes in France or in some European countries. Every Muslim woman should be able to decide what she's going to wear. I mean, she can wear a hijab, she can wear a niqab, and she can choose not to. She can wear more modern or kind of Western style dress, if you will. It's her choice, and the state should not impose anything. Also, this idea of coercion leads to what the coercive powers are most afraid, which is apostasy. In other words, when you try to make people religious by force, they become actually less religious because they dislike this imposition on them. Again, Iran is a big example. I've written a few times that the number one source of ex-Muslims in the world, people who leave Islam publicly, come from Iran. Why? Because the imposition of Islam on them by an authoritarian state makes them reactionary to it. Those who are angry at the regime become angry at religion as well, although it's not the same thing, but they perceive it as the same thing. In Turkey, there's a new trend called deism among the youth. I mean, there are youngsters who say, I believe in God, but I believe in no religion. And it's not an accident that this is taking place at a time when Islam is most publicly promoted, by the government. And some people who are angry at the government, combine Islam. So there is some wisdom between the separation of religion and state for the benefit of religion. It poisons our politics. There are Islamist movements in many parts of the Muslim world who want to bring the Sharia as a coercive force for religion, and seculars react to them. So it's endless disputes in Egypt between the Muslim Brotherhood and the other forces. So it becomes a very divisive issue. And also it creates Islamophobia in the West. I mean, Islamophobia has its own roots. There are racist attitudes in Western societies, or India, Hindu nationalism, or other problems. In the Balkans, there's certainly anti-Muslim, racist fascism. But besides that, sometimes these bad things that are happening in the name of Islam are feeding into it. So I say we have a problem here. And I remind one thing else. Christians had worse problems. The kind of idea that you should use coercion to advance religion, to uphold religion, was very popular among Christians until a few centuries ago. Actually, Islamic world was much more pluralist and tolerant. If you read European history in the 17th century, you will see how Catholics and Protestants slaughtered each other in the middle of Europe in the 30 Years' War. Being a Protestant was a reason to be killed by the Catholics, or vice versa in some other places. European history also includes this institution called auto da fe, as they call it French, burning people alive at the stake. So people were tied at a stake, like a big piece of wood. They would light fire under him and they would burn the person alive. Why? He was a heretic. Right? One of the heretics that was burned by Protestants was Michael Servetus, who actually criticized Trinity and proposed a more Unitarian Christianity, and he was killed for being a heretic. So Jews were persecuted in medieval European history.
Excuse me, Mister. Would you please 2 more minutes?
Okay.
2 more minutes. Yeah.
Okay. So this change in Christianity with the ideas of people like John Locke, thinkers like John Locke. When you read John Locke, he says he's not a non-Christian. He's a Christian, but he says he's opposing the imposition of religion through Christianity, through state power, and the idea of a neutral state, tolerance to everybody, religious toleration. These ideas has taken fold. Now, in Islam, we have better sources than sometimes Christianity. We have La ikraha fi din in the Quran. We have verses in the Quran that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is a messenger but not a compeller. But we have an Islamic tradition, jurisprudential tradition, which sometimes sideline these. Some of the verses in the Quran about non-imposition, about coercion, about toleration, to me my religion, to you your religion, verses like that were abrogated by medieval jurists. Why they were abrogated? Because they were living in a time of empires, and Islamic empires also needed coercion to uphold their faith. So I agree with, and I actually publicize the ideas of Islamic modernists. Began in the 19th century with Muhamad Ali in Egypt, Ottoman liberals in the 19th century like Namık Kemal, great thinkers of the 20th century like Fazlur Rahman from Pakistan, to reread our Islamic scriptures, our Islamic texts, and to understand that certain aspects of our medieval jurisprudence are not integral parts of our faith. They are just human history. Some of the medieval jurists thought that a good Muslim wife should always obey the husband, not because the Quran says so, but in their time and culture, it was the way things were. And Christians were thinking the same thing at the time. So we should understand what is religious and what is historical. So I'm calling for reviving and reviving some traditions in Islam, and reforming or reinterpreting some traditions. One thing I'll tell you is, because I prepared a longer speech, but sorry, I used most of my time. I'll tell you one more thing. Whenever we speak about, reinterpreting certain things in Islamic jurisprudence, conservatives will come out and say, "Oh, you cannot change the Sharia. It's God-given. It is everything is eternally valid. Every commandment in the Sharia is eternally valid." Well, we already changed a big issue. We already made a big reform in Islam on a very interesting issue, which we don't talk about anymore, which is slavery. Slavery was a part of the Islamic Sharia until the 19th century, until the 20th century in some places. It's there. It's in the books. To look at every fiqh book in classical era, slavery was taken as something normal, as a part of the human condition. True, some rights were given to slaves in the Islamic world, so the condition of slavery in the Islamic world was generally milder, more compassionate than what you would find in the West, especially in the earlier centuries of the US. But it was slavery still. And it was not freedom, it was not equality. And this changed. And ultimately, many Muslim scholars, including many conservative ones, said, well, yes, there was slavery in the Sharia, not because Islam wanted slavery. Islam found it in its historical context. Okay. Islam found it there. It improved the condition. The ultimate goal was to liberate the slaves. And we were able to do this in the 19th and 20th century, with some Western influence, I should say. Okay. So if we were able to change some aspects of our traditional jurisprudence on that issue, we can change certain aspects of our traditional jurisprudence on freedom of religion, on freedom of speech, on blasphemy, on apostasy, on religious policing, the three major issues I'm dealing in the book. And again, I'm not a mufti, I'm not a mujtahid, I'm not calling anything authoritatively here. I'm just finding the ideas of muftis and mujtahids or scholars or fuqaha that are there. It's just in some of our classical books or some of our modernist thinkers that I want to put this all in one big volume so we can have informed discussions about this need in Islam. And I believe once we do this, we will not be abandoning our faith in Islam. We will not be abandoning our commitment to Islam. We will just really living Islam more genuinely, because when religion is lived in freedom, it is genuine. When it is lived through coercion, it becomes hypocritical and it doesn't become genuine. Yep. Thank you.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right, Mr. Akyol. Yeah, if we live in freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, it will create happiness as well. Yeah, I think it's very interesting topic and argument from the Mr. Akyol tonight, that relating to the la ikraha fiddin. We don't know before that there is some paraphrase inside the La Ikraha Fidin. So easy to get in, but it's difficult to get out. Oh, so it's not good, yeah. Okay, I think we have to really use the time effectively. I hope the next speaker will be in 15 minutes, not 20, because we have to finish at around 10 in the tonight. So the next speaker will be Prof. Nina. She is a professor of Gender and Islamic Studies at the State Islamic University UIN Bandung. Her PhD on Gender and Islamic Studies and was from University of Melbourne, 2017. Just a second. Sorry, 2007, yeah. 2007. She was a Fulbright visiting researcher at Temple University and also other places like in Sydney and also in Amsterdam, yeah, in other places. And her books, yeah, she is the author of Women, Islam, and Everyday Life, Renegotiating Polygamy in Indonesia. She wrote several articles on gender and Islam in the international journals and book chapter published, for example, at Routledge, Brill, and also University of Amsterdam Press, and also other places. I think now we have Ibu Profesor Nur. Halo, Bu. Assalamualaikum. Okay, okay. Are you ready?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I think, yeah, for 15 minutes from now, Bu Nina, please.
Yeah, you can stop me if I'm over the time. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Professor Alimatul Qibtiyah, my fellow Muslim feminists. Honorable Professor Komaruddin Hidayat, Director of Indonesian International Islamic University, IIIU, as the host for this event. And I just would like to use this opportunity also to announce that the application for the IIIU for the master degree is still open until 14th of July. So please apply who are interested to continue to study. And then Honorable the author, very happy to see you, Mustafa Akyol. And I really enjoy reading your book. And also my friend, Dr. Muhamad Ali. I remember your kindness of helping me for settling well at Redlands. You took us to the shopping center when we didn't have a car yet, and it is hard to live in California without car, yeah. And for Dr. Philps J Vermonte, the Dean of Faculty of Social Science at IIIU. And then I would like also to thank Pradana Adimukti for inviting me to this honorable forum, yeah, and thank you all for the participants also. So let me start with the my standpoint, yeah. I claim myself as a Muslim feminist. Muslim feminists believe that God is just, and therefore it is impossible that the message of God written in the Quran support injustice. So the fact that some Quranic verses has been used to support injustice toward women, Muslim feminists call for interpretation of the Quranic verses. So Muslim feminists argues against literal interpretation of the Quran, which tend to subordinate women, and call for contextual reading of the Quran to ensure justice toward women. And fortunately, this book argues for contextual reading of the Quran, which gives more room to achieve gender equality, not literal reading, yeah, because literal reading can result in rigid interpretation, such as the case described in this book about the prohibition of women to travel, yeah, even though they acknowledge the different context, yeah, which is different from the context of the verse revelation and the newest context, but still they using Jabariyah or using Ash'ariyah view that you just should accept what is said in the hadith, yeah. And the book introduction has been explained clearly and elaborately by the author, so I will skip this, but the act of inquisition by religion police over the writer of this book Mustafa Akyol is just one example about the abuse of power towards the freedom of speech or the freedom of religion and the act of intolerance toward different opinion. There are many more examples described in this book about how the abuse of power to suppress tolerance, yeah. And unfortunately, it comes from both sides. For example, like the case of the early Abbasid Khalifah al-Ma'mun, who's not the Mu'tazilah. So he did the mihna, examining the opinion of the people on whether the Quran is created or uncreated, and this has resulted of many people, many of the traditionalist ulama such as Ahmad bin Hanbal was tortured and put in jail, yeah, for still arguing that the Quran is qadim, yeah, or uncreated. But the examples given in this book for the people of reason or the vendor of reasons are many more. It was horrible, and it begins from Al-Ghazali, who condemned philosophy, and then another example is what happened to Tahir al-Haddad. Tahir al-Haddad was the writer of Women in the Sharia and Society, who argue for equal rights of inheritance for women. And because of this opinion, he was condemned as apostate, and his degree from Al-Zaitun University was revoked, yeah. And it was when he was died in young age of 35 in poverty and isolation because many of his friends just deserted him, yeah. And other example, this was is really horrible, just as horrible as the cases within Christianity that the author just explained right now. That, for example, Ibnul al-Khatib, yeah, this ulama was criticizing other ulama for not like what is happening now during the pandemic. The ulama at that time didn't believe of the contagion. So Ibn Khatib criticized this ulama, but for this criticism, Ibn al-Khatib was arrested, yeah, accusing that he is being heresy, and then got tortured. And even when his body was buried, the dead body was burned, yeah. So he is famous with the man of two deaths. And also another reformist Grand Vizier Halil Fasha was also beheaded because of his criticism to fatalistic attitudes. And also Ibn Rus, I just found out that in later age of his life, he was his book was his philosophy. His book was burned, yeah, and he was humiliated in the Great Mosque of Cordoba because in his philosophy book he is criticizing the ruler for being unjust to the peoples, yeah. So any subversive to the ruler, the ulama can be accused of or being punished by the ruler. Yeah. And there are many more examples, yeah, of being, violence and being intolerance. Next, I would like to reflect on other issues, like the issue of immoral piety. The author discussed the current phenomenon in which piety is narrowly expressed in terms of praying together, veiling, but not being tolerant or not being not doing any correction. So the sarcasm is that the mosque is full, but corruption also is rising. Yeah. So this is like the society described in the case of Hai bin Yaqzan, yeah, in which Hai bin Yaqzan was disappointed of the religious society. So my reflection for this is that Indonesia has also similar phenomenon. I hope the author can have a chance to to visit Indonesia. And I believe if the pandemic is over, I think because of this book, you might be able to come to this country. Indonesia has similar opinion in which piety was also interpreted or implemented in a narrow manner, yeah, such as prayer congregation or reading the Quran or women's failings, yeah. And all of these are imposed through regulation. So it is statizations of religion, yeah. Through so like regulation at work, at school, while at the same time, some of these pious Muslims did violence acts to, for example, religious minority group such as followers of Ahmadiyah and Shia, and then still the church and reject. And there is a case also about rejection of the burial of the dead bodies of the indigenous religion. So this make me think that they prior seem not to have an impact in preventing their wrongdoing, while the Quran says, "Inna salata tanha anil fahsya'i wal munkar." So this doesn't have any effect on that. And another reflection is on the Islamist movement for moral revival, which is discussed in page 63. The author discussed on the tendency of Muslim societies in establishing the Sharia as they understood it, and many of this is literal approach. Yeah, and these Islamist groups tend to force all women to veil themselves, to ban alcohol or non-marital sex, or to enforce public prayer and other Islamic observance. So my reflection to this is that this is also happening in Indonesia recently. Like forced veiling happened in Sumatera Barat, and this is applied to both Muslim and non-Muslim female students. And this has led to the issuance of the 3 ministers' mutual agreement letter in order schools not to issue regulation either to force or prohibit veiling. Unfortunately, this letter has been misunderstood to mean that the government has, to mean that the school cannot enforce veiling, which the Islamists believe to be obligatory for Muslim women. And therefore, this regulation was soon being nullified by the Supreme Court or Mahkamah Agung. And also, still my reflection on the moral revival from the Islamists is that in Indonesia, after 1998, we had the policy of which support regional or local autonomy. But this local autonomy policy has been misused to issue what it calls Perda Syariah, the Syariah bylaw. But Komnas Perempuan, one of the women's rights institution, rejected this term to uncover the discriminatory nature of this regulation. Yeah, because if we use it, if we call it Sharia bylaws, it is hard to criticize what is behind this policy. But by naming it as discriminatory policy, then we can point out the discriminatory nature of this regulation, such as the veiling for female civil servants, the prohibition of prostitution, which seems to be good, but actually resulted in women who go out the house at night can be mistakenly arrested. And also the issuance of the regulation in order people have prayer congregation during Duhur time. And this, I agree with you, this should be based on individual conscience, not based on regulation. And also another case, you address also about the child marriage. Yeah, it is difficult in Indonesia to raise age of marriage for women. There has been 2 proposals forwarded to the Constitutional Court in 2015 and 2017, but we only had been successful in the second proposal to increase the age of marriage from 16 to 19, which is regulated in 2019. And this was also after a long debate with the Islamists, who are afraid if we increase the age of marriage, then people might commit zina. And another reflection is that Islamist movements for a moral revival usually expressed by opposition to feminist struggle. For example, Indonesian feminists now propose for anti-sexual violence bills, and the Islamists, to prevent this bill being discussed and enacted, they spread hoax, accusing that this bill is pro-zina and LGBT, while none of the article of this bill discuss about zina. And this led me to raise a question for the author and also for other speakers here. How do we deal with such kind of Islamist conservatives who argue against gender equality? And,
2 more minutes, Mbak.
how many more minutes?
2 more minutes, please.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, I think I will skip this. I will say that the book is opening our mind. The book is really opening our mind. I enjoy reading this book. It is alive, communicative, systematic, and critical of what has happened throughout Muslim history. And this book has pointed out that the reason for Muslim to achieve golden age, which started during the Abbasid period, was due to Muslim eagerness to learn from any sources, including Greek philosophy, or to use the reason. And the cause of the decline among Muslims due to fatalistic view of Jabariyah and Ash'ariyah. And this book has uncovered the relationship between fatalistic view and interest of the ruler. For example, during the Khalifah Umayyah, and this actually to preserve the power, the ruler power, and to make they people stop thinking critically, or to keep the people not questioning injustice. Yeah, I remember I have already learned ilmu kalam since my undergraduate, but it is now that I only know that the reason behind why the ruler won the Ash'ariyah and Jabariyah among its people, in order they can be like tyrannical. So this book is a sharp criticism to Ash'ariyah as a cause of Muslim decline, while the tradition of using reason has been adopted by the West, which is progressing up until now. And at the end of this book, the author call for the suppression of no one, and for acknowledging, learning, and following the ideas of Mu'tazilah, the Falasifa, and the Murji'ah, the three groups which has been marginalized. Yeah, and from Mu'tazilah, we can learn to respect both revelation and reason, and from the Falasifa, we can learn about the inclusivity of or universalism of knowledge, that we should open to all intellectual achievement of humanity, regardless of the religious background of the philosophers. And for Murji'ah, we learn to tolerate what we disagree, so we can live together harmoniously among differences, and to let God judge what we have done. And as closing, I really recommend to read this book. It is a nutritious book for our mind. And if there is any publisher in Indonesia who is ready to publish Indonesian version, I will be ready and be happy to be the translator of this book. Thank you, Mustafa Akyol, for enlightening me with your book. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Ibu Profesor Nina Nurmila. She is my senior at Komnas Perempuan. I'm the generation, the younger
Thank
of
you.
her. And I think I absolutely agree with her that welcome Pak Akyol ya to come to Indonesia. I believe that you will not sleep in jail, yeah, like in Malaysia. So we are so happy to read your book with a very nutritious Ibu Nina mentioned about the book. Okay, we are going to for the third speaker. He is Muhamad Ali, PhD. Bapak Ali is an Indonesian scholar of Islamic and Religious Studies in the United States, and he earned BA in Islamic Studies from the State Institute for Islamic Studies Jakarta, and also dual degree of management from University of Indonesia and University of Grenoble, France, and also he earned master degree in Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies from Edinburgh University, Scotland, and his PhD in history, focusing on Southeast Asia, Europe, world, and the Middle East from the University of Hawaii, USA. Dr. Ali has published books, articles, chapters, and opinion on topic related to Islam, such as jihad, violence and peace, gender, interfaith dialogue, and global education, Muslim perception of Judaism and Jewish, Islamic liberal movement, and Southeast Asian history. Dr. Ali right now teach courses on Islam, the Quran, comparative scripture, Islam in Southeast Asia, Southeast Asian religion, and graduate seminar on approaches to Islam, religion, politics, and public discourse and religion. So please welcome Pak Muhamad Ali. It's time for you.
Thank you so much, Professor Alimatul Qibtiyah. Thank you, the host of this discussion, Mustafa Akyol book, wonderful book, and I'm very pleased to be part of this discussion. I'm currently in Indonesia. In fact, in one of my former pesantren or Islamic boarding school in West Java, where it teaches the Ash'ariism, the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah Ash'ariism. That one of the things that Mustafa Akyol's book is very critical of. I come from a very different background as a Muslim, taught with different knowledge, especially theology and philosophy in the Department of Usuluddin, the fundamentals of religion. And it is very refreshing, and it becomes, this book reminds me of all the things that we learn in Usuluddin. So we come to, understand the theology, for example. This book is really about theology. Why theology matters, why our mindset, our theological thinking matters in making us as a human society backward or advanced, in making us becoming more human or less human, become more tolerant or less tolerant, leading to freedom or authoritarianism. And of course, reason and science, technology, or traditionalism, conservatism, and so on. So the core of this book, which we appreciate, is theology matters. Our mindset matters. Our theological thinking matters. And of course, some of the issues about apostasy, about coercion or compulsion in religion, about gender inequality, about some of the fatwas. Some of the fatwas are very trivial fatwas regarding, whether or not you urinate sitting or standing, for example, right? So all these things are very practical issues, as well as very broad issues regarding the development of Muslim society in the modern time. So for example, the broader issue here is science. The question that Mustafa Akyol asked here is why Muslims today, second only to the Christian population in the world, have become backward, or at least underdeveloped, or still developing in science and technology, in education, in university, in research. It's still very low. Not only that, why most Muslim majority countries are still left behind in happiness index, in human development index. In other words, to be Muslim doesn't mean that you become happy. To be Muslim doesn't mean that you have good quality of life, right? So this question is real question. It is a question of everyone. And interestingly, this book tried to answer the question by returning to our own thinking, and especially our way of life in terms of our education, religious education, through madrasa, through university education, and so on and so forth. For example, the book is critical of Islamization of knowledge. Science is universal. So why, for example, we should label science like Islamic science? Or for example, why should we label philosophy like Islamic philosophy? Or economics, Islamic economics, right? Banking, Islamic banking. Even now, it is quite trendy to Islamize almost everything. Tourism, Islamic tourism, Islamic dress, Islamic, all kind of things that are not even there in the time of the Prophet Muhammad. So you don't have a Islamic thing during the time of the Prophet in Mecca and Medina. But now the Muslims, many Muslims, even in Indonesia, tend to label science that has to be universal and universalized, more parochial, religious, and less universal. So this is one of the concerns of Mustafa Akyol, and he tried to suggest that our mindset, making things exclusive Islamically, this makes Muslims still underdeveloped in science and technology. So that's a broad question that I think this book tried to engage with. The second point I would like to make in this occasion is sectarianism. Sectarianism is one of the main problems today between aliran. In Indonesian, there's a term aliran. Sectarianism, you have, in the past, Ash'ari is Sunni and Shiite. And of course, you have among Sunni Ash'ariism, and then you have different legal thought, Shafi'i, Hanafi, Maliki, Hambali, for example, and most Muslims in Indonesia have embraced Shafi'i. So it's Ash'ari theologically and Shafi'i jurisprudentially, and this is how Muslims in Indonesia have embraced, while they don't really take for granted, they take for granted the fact that Muslims in Indonesia become Sunni, Ash'ari, and Shafi'i because of the ulama networks, because of the ulama who came to Southeast Asia were mostly Sunni and Shafi'i. That's why Muslims in Indonesia until today are Sunni and Shafi'i. This thing is taken for granted. The fact that we are Muslims and we are Sunni and Ash'ari and Shafi'i, for example, as a mainstream, are historical. It is not God-given. So Mustafa Akyol, through this book, suggests that we have to understand that people in India, they would be more likely not Shafi'i, for example. Even people in Iran, they would be more likely, if they live in Iran, if they are born in Iran, they would be more likely Shiite, for example. But in Indonesia, many Muslim Sunni say that Shiite is un-Islamic or heretic, right? But this is taken for granted. So theology matters. This is one of the main arguments here in this book is theology matters, because the main concern of many Muslims, the preachers, the public intellectuals, in different parts of the world, are legalistic, are jurisprudential, because fiqh is practical. What you should do, what you should not do, what you can eat, what you cannot eat, how you dress, how you deal with other people, how you deal with this, and all this very, very detailed minutes of life. This is very practical. It has become the main concern of people, the masses, the awam, and that's why Al-Ghazali is very popular. Al-Ghazali is very popular. Ihya Ulumuddin is very popular because Al-Ghazali is able to combine faith revelation and reason in a way that is more compromistic, in a way that is more accommodationist, to people's mindset and the ordinary peoples. While Ibn Rushd, for example, that Mustafa mentioned in the book as the way forward, return to reason, return to philosophy, meaning return to Ibn Rushd. We have to bring Ibn Rushd back in our education, in our popular preaching, and so on. But the reality is that Ibn Rushd's book, the book about philosophy and the incoherence of incoherence, critics of Al-Ghazali, it has become less popular in the pesantren, in Islamic education, even in Islamic universities. So Ibn Rushd is only very elitist, philosophy, only circulated among some educated, literate individuals interested in Islamic philosophy, not as a subject for all the departments or programs in Islamic schools and universities. So this is the challenges that I try to refer to. What are some of the challenges when we try to restore Muslim minds, return to reason, return to philosophy, and also return to tolerance? One is our education. I think that's number one. Even though the book doesn't really address what kind of education we should embrace and cultivate in order to return to reason, return to freedom and tolerance. The next point I would like to make is communalism. One of the problems in the Muslim world today is communalism, community. Ummah, the concept of ummah, beside the concept of dawla or power or politics, there's also another, an underlying issue here. Ummah, the notion of ummah, community, that ummah means majority. So people tend to follow the mainstream. People like to be part of the mainstream. People like to be part of the community. They don't want to be left behind. They don't want to be marginalized. They don't want to be, I'm the only one. There is a lack of individual autonomy in the Muslim societies today. Lack of individual autonomy. So there is a tendency to always conform to the orthodox, to the what is mainstream. That is why there's a blasphemy law still, is what we call blasphemy law, 1966 in Indonesia, that that punishes any person who has an Islamic understanding or a religious understanding that is not mainstream, that is not considered mainstream. That's why Ahmadi, Shi'i, or even others, even among Christians here, they are considered heretic or non-marginal, or marginal. They might also face some problems because they are not part of the mainstream. So one of the underlying issues or challenges in the Muslim world today is communalism and the lack of individual autonomy. In other words, the lack of individual freedom.
2 more minutes, please.
Yep. And I have a last point about tolerance. This is one of my concerns for many years. I like to write about tolerance and pluralism, for example. This book doesn't really embrace like religious pluralism, that you have to believe that Christians or Jews or Hindus would go to heaven. You don't have to believe in that kind of religious pluralism, like, for example, John Hick's understanding of religious pluralism. The notion of tolerance is the least that you can have. At least you give other peoples to believe the way they want to believe. And even though this book is very critical of Islamists, of conservatives, of jurisprudential, mindset peoples, right? The Sharia-minded people. This book is also very critical of some Sufi or even Shiite who believe in the infallibility of the Imam rather than their own individual reason. This book is very critical of some of the mainstream theologies. But at the same time, the book doesn't endorse banning this or minimizing this influence. No, actually books talk about the plurality of ideas. And this is what I like about this, especially in the epilogue. Yeah, the epilogue talks about the plurality of ideas. Can we live and give the same equality and freedom to the marginalized, to the Mu'tazili, even to the atheists, even to agnostic, even to free thinkers, even those who are in our modern time, LGBT peoples, who also are discriminated against in many Muslim majority countries. So the notion of tolerance, it is problematic, but at the same time, it is the least that we can offer to the majority people. At least, if you also need freedom, you have to give the same freedom to other peoples. Because one thing, last second, if we want to have our own freedom, we have to give the same freedom to other peoples. This is a golden rule, and I think that is what we appreciate from the book. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate. I don't have any slide, but I am very looking forward to engaging more with Mustafa Akyol. Thank you and congratulations for the book and all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Muhamad Ali. Yeah, I think last thing on chapter 14, Mustafa Akyol mentioned about the theology of tolerance, and there is subtitle which is preacher, not judges. But in Indonesian context, sometimes there are many ulama social media as judges, not as preacher, although they are preacher. So this is something also reflective idea in Indonesian context. Okay, we are going to for the fourth speaker. He is Bapak Philps Vermonte. Dr. Philps received his Master of Art degree in International Studies from Department of Politics, the University of Adelaide, Australia, and also he got his PhD in Political Science at Northern Illinois University, USA, and also now Dr. Philps served as the Dean of Political Science of Triple AU, University Islam Indonesia International, owned by State University, which will be started next September 2021. He also the chairman of Persepsi, Perhimpunan Survei Opini Publik, or the Indonesian Association of Public Opinion Survey Agencies. I invite Pak Philip, please, time for you.
Thank you, Professor.
Also 15 minutes, ya Pak.
Yes, thank you, Professor Alim. And good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. Good morning to Mustafa in Washington, D.C. I will be very brief because actually I wanted to hear more from Mustafa Akyol about his book, but I will try to line up what, in my opinion, has been the topic of the book and why it is interesting for us in Indonesia, given the fact that reading the book, I could sense some differences and some similarities of the situation that we are facing now in Indonesia, and then with what Mustafa depicted in his book. I was intrigued by the book when I read the summary of the book that Mustafa wrote in the New York Times before the book came out, and then since then on I hunted the book, and luckily I got one. But now for the discussion, I would like to make some several points. Number one, this is my personal opinion. The book grapples with questions we are all trying to answer as well, and the question is this: why reason has deserted the Muslim nations, so to speak? And Mustafa provides answer in his book, and then his ultimate answers, in my opinion, are threefold. Number one, quoting Edward Said, Mustafa quoted Edward Said that number one, we do not know how to think. And number two, we are faced with the theological postulate that did not allow too much reasoning, i.e. the dominance of the Sharia thinking in most of the Muslim society across the globe. Number three, in my opinion, political power in the Muslim lands have always been the hindrance of freedom of thinking. So these three main, I think, ideas have been meticulously researched by Mustafa in the book, and I really admire the way he wrote the book and the way he built the argument by analyzing and depicting all the great thinking of the Islamic greatest thinkers, and the sad fate that many of them ended up. And some of these are new to me, to be frank. But to sum up the sad fate that faced by Ibn Rushd and others, and all this their fights for freedom in thinking, it's rightly termed by Mustafa in his book. It's like the intellectual suicide of us, Muslims across the globe, or self-sabotage about our own, advancement. Once that we had the advancement in the past, but then we started to have this intellectual suicide. We could see in the book the tragic life of Averroes, Ibn Rushd, compared to the victorious life of, quote unquote, victorious life of Maimonides, his Jew contemporary, who became one of the thinkers in the reforms in the Jewish thinking. Now, with these three main ideas, the question remains still why? Why we are still in many of the Muslim nations, Muslim majority countries, the backwardness, the lack of investment in technology, and so on and so forth. Why is it the case? Why reform did not occur in the Muslim majority countries? And the same question that was asked by Mustafa in his book. And I was intrigued by a paragraph in the book depicting the life of Ibrahim Mutafarriq in the Ottoman Caliphate. In 1727, he brought in the printing machine to the Ottoman Empire and start printing, treaties, articles, and so on and so forth. And this is about 300 years late from the 1400s, when Gutenberg invented the machine. And we know the impact of this Gutenberg machine, the printing, the impact on the Christendom. It triggered reform, it triggered Protestantism, and so on, through the writings and the arguments made by the proponents of the Renaissance in the Western world at the time. But it's 300 late came to the Ottoman Empire. And partly, I think, this is also the problem of how the power, the elites, actually in most of the Muslim lands at that time, including the Ottoman, they prevented such invention to come to the Muslim land. 300 years late, I think it's too late. And then we know the impact of the printing, the books, the writings, and so on. Later on, Ben Anderson, for example, also writes something similar about this, about the effect of print capitalism to the emergence of nationalism across, Southeast Asia, Indonesia in particular, and the Latin American countries. And then we could imagine how late it was for the printing machine came to the Ottoman Empire. Number two, why we are late. In his book, I think Mustafa also argued that, or I can infer that we failed to avoid despotism or authoritarianism. In fact, Mustafa greatly describe and analyze the thinking of Ibn Rushd, Al-Farabi, and their contemporaries. And then the one thing that I agree with was that Ibn Rushd and others at the time, I really regretted that they could not access Aristotle's Aristotle words, the Greek philosopher, but rather they were at the time access Plato's work. And I think this give impacts on the writings of this thinker, Ibn Rushd, especially Ibn Khaldun, Al-Farabi, and so on. Because if Aristotle's work came to Ibn Rushd at the time, he would, I don't know whether this should happen, but I think it would give more impact on the thinking about the role of the people instead of the power holders. Because, intrinsically, in my view, reading all the descriptions in the book, intrinsically in the Muslim land, we are told to hope for benign ruler. So kind of we give benefit of the doubt to the power holders, because somehow they are our leaders and so on. So we give them benefit of the doubt, and then we are hope that they will be a benign ruler. And then this is in line with most of the Plato's work, as Mustafa also described in the book, The Republic and the Laws. It's Plato is expecting to have a benign ruler, and it impacted the thinking of Ibn Khaldun and others. And then it's also interesting this, especially because the subtitle of this part is catching my eyes, because it's titled The Political Science of the Philosopher. I'm a political scientist by training, so I enjoy reading that part, especially. And on Ibn Khaldun, actually, he, through the Muqaddimah, he also, I think, put the ground foundation for actually the democratic thinking of the Islamic society. He argued, for example, for limited government, and then for low tax. And you mentioned, Mustafa mentioned in the book how Ronald Reagan quoted Ibn Khaldun in his op-ed in 1993. And then especially if we can summarize the thinking of Ibn Khaldun, is that if a dynasty of a ruler hold on to power for too long, they will become corrupt. So this, of course, went against the practice of that time, where the caliphate would be in power for too long. And I would say Ibn Rushd or Ibn Khaldun probably would be happy to see the term limit in most democracy, the term limit of the rulers in most democracy today, as they were against what was that, Tagalog, seizing power by power, or in the contemporary terms in political science, and the non-constitutional or inconstitutional change of power. So these actually have been in the thinking of these Islamic great thinkers at the time. Now, number three, why this quote unquote backwardness? Mustafa kind of play down a little bit about the role of colonialism and imperialism. He mentioned in the book that it might play some role in the situation that we are now, but I think the post-colonial situation, colonialism is bad because it did not give us time to institutionalize. Most of the newly established countries in the post-World War II are new country with no institutions available to run as a modern country. As a result, the idea of despotism, the idea of autocratic rule, would be ingrained in the society, so that they could not afford to have a democracy, in such a short period of time, when what they needed is nation building, for example. And I think Indonesia is one case in point. Up until now, for example, the question of the relationship between religion and the state since day one of the Republic in 1945. Now, still, we are discussing it and debating, and sometimes it creates political turmoil in Indonesia. So I think the role, the post-colonial context is important in most of these Muslim countries. And then also, if we interact with other literature, like in the economics or political science, for example, we know this. It so happened that many of these Muslim countries in Indonesia, in North Africa, we are rich, but we are blessed with natural resources. And we know that, in literature, we know this term of the resource curse theory, that most of the country with resourceful, with natural resources, at the same time, most of them are authoritarian countries. And
2 more minutes,
rulers,
please.
yes,
Sorry.
okay. The rulers again interact with money, with capitals, and so on. So we are facing different effects of the situation, but similar in terms of how the ruler and the mass interact. Lastly, I agree with Mustafa in his epilogue that we should confront differences. And what I like the most about the book is the quote from the line he wrote about Ibn Rushd, that if I may quote it directly here, that Ibn Rushd, when he opposes something, he doesn't shy away from depicting it. He doesn't fear that readers will fall for his opponent's argument. He rather trusts in the power of his own argument. So I think this is what we, not only in Indonesia, probably in the Muslim world, start to really confront differences. Sometimes we are afraid of confronting differences and disregard the power of argument. And if there is one takeaway from the book that I would suggest, is that this power of thinking should become culture back in the Muslim society. Thank you. I return the screen to Ibu Professor Alim. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Philip. Yeah, there are many questions already in the chat room, but we need to listen from our host today, Pak Prof. Komaruddin Hidayat. Halo, Pak Komar.
Well,
okay, would you please
as a
give
host,
also
well,
comment?
No. As a host, I really would like to convey my gratitude to my colleague Mustafa Akyol, who has been sharing his wisdom and enlightening ideas. And my thank also goes to Alima, Philip, Ali, and Nurmila, who already also sharing to enrich our mind. It's then tonight becoming very nutritious for our mind. That's enough for me. I can't wait to enjoy the next and following discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Pak Komar. Okay, now we are going to question and answer. I already collect the question from Pak Mustafa Akyol. There are some questions here for Mustafa Akyol. At least there are 6 questions, which is first of all from Pak Aziz Awaluddin. What is the Islam situation in Turkey, especially that is related to the Gulen movement? And from Pak Anton Alifandi, how far would you go in reinterpreting Islam? You mentioned fiqh. Would you interpret the hadith and the Quran? Also, can Islam or other religion give a meaningful contribution to the 21st issues like climate change? Third, Pak Haryono Aswacahyono, could you explain more about the, I don't know, I can't pronounce, dilemma and occasionalism, which is the core of your book. And Pak Didi, someone said that we don't extract values from religion. Instead, we inject our values into our religion. Is that what we are doing here? In which Islam will have so many faces which have little in common with each other. And the fifth, Triastri Prabhawati, as we are less tolerant these days, do we need to change how we teach religion in Indonesia? And from Pak Adi, since most of Indonesian Muslim influenced by Ash'ari theology, how could we implement Akus idea in Indonesia? Okay, I invite Pak Mustafa Akyol. Would you please respond to 6 questions?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks to all of our colleagues, friends here who asked these questions. And I also am very thankful to the commentators who spoke before me and said really kind words about my book and my work. Now, let me try to combine these questions into maybe a few answers. Let me begin with the last question, which is, since most Indonesian Muslims are influenced by Ash'ari theology, how could we implement Akyol's ideas in Indonesia? Which refers to the criticism that I have towards classical Ash'arism in my book. Now, I should say one thing. I don't expect Muslims of the Ash'arite persuasion to say, oh, we're not Ash'arites anymore. I mean, those things don't change in history. These things don't happen that easily in human history. However, theological schools can evolve and develop and sometimes move away from some of their earlier ideas. This has already happened. I mean, the late Ash'arites, Mutaakhirun as they're called, were more nuanced than the first strict Ash'arites in the first school, and they introduced some philosophical thinking, for example, which gave us thinkers like Fakhreddin al-Razi, the great Mufassirun, who was certainly more nuanced than some early Ash'arites. Also, even in the Hanbali tradition, which is actually the strictest one, you have some late Hanbalis like El-Tufi, who actually, highlighted the influence of maslaha or human interest in Sharia. So one can still be in a certain tradition, but move away or at least bring some nuance to some of its problematic views. That's what I'm saying about, speaking about. And which brings me to the Euthyphro dilemma, which is indeed the core issue of my book. Let me try to explain this because this is very fundamental. There was this early debate in the formative centuries of Islam about the meaning of husn and qubh, or beauty or ugliness, or good and bad. There were two schools, there were two approaches. One approach, the rationalist approach, which was spearheaded by the Mu'tazila, but which also survived in the Maturidi tradition, which is a mainstream Sunni view, very closely identified with the Hanafi school. They said things are good or bad because of their inherent qualities. In other words, killing an innocent person is bad, or saving a person in need is good, even if we didn't have any religion, if we didn't receive any revelation from God. These things are there. These ethical values are out there in the world, which means even people without religion can have moral values because God gave that internal compass as conscience. And there are verses in the Quran that point to conscience, which means a non-Muslim, a kafir like Aristotle, might have some good ethical ideas and you can learn from him, which means today you might have atheists in Europe, which might be very ethical people, which a lot of Muslims see sometimes with surprise because we assume that they shouldn't be ethical because they are out of our religious tradition. No, there is something about human nature, there's something human conscience, which religion, of course, informs and warns and cultivates, but it is separate from religion. So that was the crucial thing. The Ash'arites, the Ash'arite founders of the Ash'arite school insisted that no, there is no ethical value outside of the Sharia. So killing is bad because God, through the Sharia, says it is bad. If there was no religion, there was going to be no value outside of that. So feeding a person in need is good only because God said so through religion, not something that God gave us through our conscience. So that's why I'm critical of the dominance of the Ash'arite theology, which close Muslims with engaging with the ethical ideas out there in the world, in the world outside of Islam. In the early centuries, that was Aristotle's ethical ideas, and Muslims actually got some of that. It came through Islam, through the writings of Miskawai, and then that was actually partly brought into, with some modification by Imam al-Ghazali and others, into Sunni Islam. But after that short initial engagement, many Muslims would say, we don't have anything to learn. Now, if you think like this, all the experience of humanity doesn't mean anything to you. You can say, the world has seen authoritarian regimes, and the world has experienced fascism and communism, and ultimately liberal democracy came out as a better idea because people are not oppressed. It includes things like freedom of speech. It includes things like separation of powers. So limitations on the rulers' powers and all that. I mean, if you say the world has this experience, some Muslims will tell you today, it is all kuffar. I mean, it's all beyond the pale. We don't care. We look into what Imam al-Ghazali wrote about governance, or we look at what al-Mawardi wrote about governance. Well, they wrote about governance in their time and milieu, which was a very different time. And after that, the world had changed a lot. So I think the closing of the minds, I'm criticizing in the book that Muslims thought that every wisdom we need, ethical, political, scientific, it is already in our classical text, in the Quran and the prophetic Sunnah and the Hadith. Now, my argument is that the Quran itself doesn't say that. The Quran itself actually calls us to think and to travel and to see and to learn, to see what happened to the older ancient civilizations. So I think the Quran itself calls for a more open mind. It is very interesting that when sometimes in certain verses, the Quran tells Muslims to do justice, while not defining what justice means exactly, because it is open to ma'ruf, that's known by human reason and human conscience. So I think we lost the idea that on one of our legs will be always, one of our firm holds is the Quran and the tradition and the Sunnah, but the other one should be universal and open. So we should be open to universal wisdom. It was Aristotle 10 centuries ago. Today it would be Habermas or Karl Popper or Hayek or whatever Western philosopher, or Chinese or a Japanese philosopher. It's not just about the West, but whatever, the universal wisdom of humanity, which culminated in values like universal human rights. So I'm calling for rebridging that gap, which was closed due to Asharite theology, an extreme version of Asharite theology. And I believe a more nuanced Asharite thinking can take place. So I would call upon that. Also, I see a growing interest in Maturidi theology, which is good news. I mean, in Turkey, there are now international conferences on Maturidi theology, because Maturidi theology was a main Sunni theological school, but it disagreed with the Asharites on these critical issues that I'm speaking about, on the matter of Husn al-Kubu, for example. And actually, Maturidis have ideas that are close to the Mu'tazila on these issues. So, and we should give up the idea that, Mu'tazila is heretical. Well, they were declared heretical by one caliph, and if the other caliph was ruling, the other ones would be heretical. So we should give up the idea that they're heretical groups. There is this rich heritage of Islam. Now, which brings me to the question number 4. Someone said we don't extract values from religion. Instead, we inject our values into our religion. Is it what we're doing here? Well, what I will say to you is that both of these dynamics take place all the time. Religion comes to us through texts, right? Through the Quran and through the Hadith, and these are the sources. So they give values to us. But when we read and implement them, we inevitably put our existing values into the religion. What we should understand is this has already happened back there, because some Muslims think that we have this God-given, untouchable, perfect Islamic tradition, and now some modern-minded Muslims are bringing ideas into it. No, what we're saying is our tradition already includes a lot of ideas inserted into religion by medieval conditions. Patriarchy, I mean, the idea that women should always obey the husbands and never say no to his wishes, that was the culture of the pre-modern society. Blasphemy laws, I believe, is the culture of the context in which Islam was born. Look at the Byzantine empires, Byzantine Empire at the time. Look at the Sassanid Empire. They had the same laws. So Muslims issued similar laws. So there is already an interaction of certain values and Islam in both ways. Islam influenced society, but society influenced understanding of Islam. But we live in a radically different society right now, and better one, I should say, in terms of human rights. Like slavery. I mean, slavery was a value, an institution of the time. But it's good that humanity got rid of slavery. And today, if there are people who say slavery is a part of the Sharia, we should preserve it, as there are people like that. I think what they're doing is to confuse history, confuse human history, especially bad episodes in human history, with the divinely given religion. This also includes, I should say, understanding that the Quran also had a context, which opens up issues about how we read the Quran. I mean, for example, one simple example, I think the reason why there are corporal punishments in the Quran rather than other kinds of punishment like prison is because it was the norm in 7th century Arabia. Pre-modern Arabs were also cutting the hands of thieves. We know that, I mean, the polytheists were doing the same thing. The Quran gave the same punishment for theft because it was the only thing that is doable in 7th century Arabia. There were no prisons, and that was the structure of society. So even that human history comes into the context in which the text was revealed or interpreted. Now, coming back to, so Euthyphro dilemma is that. Euthyphro dilemma is whether the commandments of God tell us about ethical values that are out there, that are objective, or whether the commandments of God establish value without which we would not have any value. And I think this distinction is very important. And all the schools of thought that I highlight in early Islam, that is the Mu'tazila, Maturidis in Sunni Islam, the philosophers, they all believe that there's a universal truth out there, which Islam is also guiding us, which is also informing us, and also Islam is also teaching new, maybe ethical values, but ethical values are already a part of humanity, so we can connect with humanity. So, second question, how far would you go in reinterpreting Islam? You mentioned fiqh. Would you interpret the hadith and the Quran? Of course, we interpret hadith and the Quran because the fiqh is the existing interpretation of hadith and the Quran. And there, I will tell you a few things. One is regarding the Quran, understanding the Quran has a context is important, and especially regarding the political conflict between the early Muslims and the polytheists of Mecca or some of the Jewish tribes later in Medina is important. We should understand that when the Quran sometimes commends war against the unbelievers, it's not a universal commandment against war against non-Muslims. It's a specific event in the life of the Prophet Muhammad. And it is important to understand that when Prophet Muhammad began preaching Islam in Mecca, he didn't want to establish a state. He didn't establish an army. He wanted from the Meccans freedom of religion and freedom of speech. I mean, the Quran doesn't define it that way, but that's what you can see. What did Muslims want in Mecca? They said, let us be Muslims, don't persecute us, and also let us have the chance to preach Islam, to say that your gods are false, we believe in one God, and this is our belief. If they were given that chance in Mecca, probably there would be no hijrah, there would be no battles between Meccans and Meccan polytheists and Muslims later in Medina. So my argument there is that we should understand that the Quran is contextual and the Quran is regulating a certain battle of survival that the Prophet had to have. And we should not take the verses there out of that context and see it as universal commandments that are relevant at every age. Plus, we should give up the idea that the peaceful verses of the Quran are abrogated by warlike verses, as medieval jurists did. And we should understand that the verses of the Quran are all relevant, but to different contexts. And we today mainly live in peaceful contexts. So I think the Meccan verses are more relevant to our reality today. Regarding the hadith, huge topic, but I do believe in caution regarding the whole literature that we call Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih al-Muslim, and the other 4 books in Sunni jurisprudence that are not necessarily 100% considered Sahih, but still very authoritative. The 6 books, There, I rely on the Ahl al-Ray tradition in Islam, which was Hanafis mainly, basically early Hanafis. They were skeptical about the authoritativeness of ahad hadiths, that are hadiths that are coming from just one person. Whereas mutawatir hadiths, massively transmitted hadiths, of course, are more trustable. And it is important because these ahad hadiths, the hadiths they're hadiths that just come from one person and a chain based on that person's report. These make up much of the Sahih hadiths, and the apostasy ban, issues of blasphemy generally come from these ahad hadiths, and I think we need caution. And I believe in the supremacy of the Quran and the principles of the Quran over the hadiths. So I believe, in other words, I believe that there are more untrustable hadiths than what the mainstream Sunni tradition has believed. But even in the mainstream Sunni tradition, in the beginning, in the Hanafi circles in Iraq, you see a certain caution towards the hadiths, which was suppressed by Imam Shafi and his elevation of hadiths to the level of the Quran. I believe Quran, I'm not a Quranist, I'm not saying Quran first, but I believe in the supremacy of the Quran, and hadiths should be evaluated according to the general principles of the Quran. Are we less tolerant these days? Do we need to change how we teach religion in Indonesia? Well, I mean, you are much more knowledgeable about Indonesia than me. I mean, I follow the news, and of course, Indonesia is different. I mean, Aceh province is different from the rest. I mean, I will really love to hear your thoughts on that. But just generally, we need tolerance. And one thing that is problematic is we lack tolerance sometimes, not because of theological directly or jurisprudential issues, but just because of some narrow-minded nationalism. Like, this is our community, and this is our faith, and this is our tradition, and anything else, we don't allow it because we don't want to see it. So this is a kind of narrow-minded religious nationalism. I see that in Pakistan very often, for example. Sometimes it doesn't even come from religious texts. So I see that in Malaysia, for example. I mean, being a Malay is being Muslim, so you ban Christians from uttering the word Allah, which is not even, acceptable from a traditional Islamic point of view. So there is a mix of religion and nationalism. And by being less tolerant, we're not making ourselves greater. We're actually making ourselves close-minded, and we're losing respect, I think, in the eyes of other people. One final question: what's the Islam situation in Turkey, especially related to the ban of Gülen movement? Well, the situation in Turkey is unfortunately not great. I had much better hopes about Turkey 10 years ago. But what happened is that Turkish Islamic groups that captured power in the past 10, 15 years really failed the test of power. That includes the group mentioned here, Gülen movement, which seems to be a civil society movement, and in that sense, there should be no problem. But they got engaged in a battle to capture the bureaucracy, state bureaucracy, and they did terrible things, wrong things, and ultimately it turned against them. And in the meantime, today, the Islamic groups that are allied behind President Erdogan, they are now the ruling groups. They are Islamic groups, and they are also failing the test because they are displaying arrogance, corruption, authoritarianism in the name of Islam, which is driving a lot of Turks away from religion these days. And the rise of deism at a time when Turkish Islamists became most powerful is not an accident. What Turkey needs ultimately is a national consensus and reconciliation to establish a system that no group will be seen as enemy within, and everybody will have equal rights. Unfortunately, Turkey has never been able to do that. We are a very divided nation, and we are really just persecuting each other by hating each other with a lot of ways. I hope Turkey will arrive at that point at some point. Tunisia, in that sense, can be a better example. So I tried to answer the questions, but am I missing anything? Or
Number 3?
Number 3, how could you explain more about the universal dilemma and occasionalism? Okay, well, I touched upon universal dilemma, but occasionalism is another aspect of Ash'arism that I criticize in my book regarding especially science. Now, occasionalism is the Western term for a doctrine, theological doctrine, which is very strong in Ash'arism, which is to say that there are no laws of nature. There are no laws of nature that necessitate of other things. In other words, when I hold this glass and I put it here and there's a sound, it's really not the consequence of the events that create that sound. That sound is created by God separately. So it's like God is creating every instant separately. Now, this was promoted by the Asharites to assert the supremacy of God and the power of God besides everything else. But I don't think it is really necessitated by the Quran itself. God created the universe, but I think we have room to believe God created the universe with certain laws, and that those laws are operating according to the way that God, established them. So occasionalism, in my view, created a less scientific view of the world. And in the book, I try to show how that worked in certain episodes in Muslim history. Even when we look at political events and how do we interpret them. I think we need a more scientific view of the world that is at peace with religion. I'm not arguing for scientism that is generally, associated with atheism, but scientific in the sense that we should understand God created the world in an orderly way, and discovering that order, which is not an Islamic but a universal mission. That's why there's no Islamic science, there's no Islamic chemistry. There's chemistry of mankind that everybody can discover. And I think occasionalism is the root of this idea that there should be an Islamic version of everything. There should be an Islamic version of economy. There should be an Islamic version of lifestyle, and so on and so forth. Whereas I think, of course, there are Islamic certain ways of dress or living or cuisine, but there is a huge common human area. I mean, physics doesn't change whether you're a Muslim or a Hindu or an atheist. You make the same physical experiment. So I think we should understand that there's universalistic disciplines, which includes social sciences, which includes reading of texts, hermeneutics, from which all we can learn, and we should reconcile them with Islam rather than creating Islamic versions of them.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mustafa Akyol.
I think
for the
I have
response.
a question in my presentation for the author of Mustafa. I asked you about the question about how to deal with Islamist conservatives who like to make it eligible to do anything to in opposing feminist struggle.
Yeah, before that, I don't know, I can't read this one because I think in Turkish language, so I don't understand. So maybe Mrs. Mustafa Akyol, do you understand what the question of this from Ibn Rus? And also some question for Bunina. Actually, she already answered in the chat room, but also there are some question from Pak Didi Sajali. I don't know is going to whom. Islam, as we know, is much more from form than substance. From the early age, our religious education has always been on form. It is no surprise that it is difficult to identify what are the intrinsic values in Islam. We have to dig deep to find them. I don't know this, Pak Didi, the question goes to Pak Mustafa as well or other speaker, and also there are some one question for Pak Anton, for Pak Ali from Pak Anton. In terms of plan of action, how would you bring the ideas of Ibn Rus to the awam of Indonesia? But before, would you respond for this question, Pak Akyol? Because I don't know
Ibn
what
Rushd,
is.
a young Ibn Rushd, I think. He goes with the name of Ibn Rushd. This is a Turkish friend of ours who says, I should translate it. I mean, dear Mustafa Akyol, thank you. I lived in Turkey 4 years in the religious courses of a conservative community. Reading your book since 2015, first Islam Without Extremes and then Islamic Jesus. Your book saved me from closed ideas. I have a question to you. Why the Islamic world is making progress so slowly, what are the problems in our religious ideas? Well, thank you so much. Wonderful to hear this. Well, this is a book. This is a topic I wrote a book, right? I mean, it's not an easy way to put into sentences, but I think opening up and learning from humanity is, I think, important. Today, I mean, if you want to, I mean, develop good technology, I think you should look into how South Korea has been successful, right? Or today, if you want to learn something about, I mean, modern science, look into the developed countries of the world, from the US to Germany. I mean, look at vaccines. I mean, who made the vaccines? Our understanding of Islam sometimes tells us that we should only look into our own Islamic tradition, and all the wisdom we need is there. I'm not saying we should not look into the Islamic tradition, but we should reconcile, we should open up to the rest of the world. And in fact, not just only our own Islamic tradition, but our own sect, because the other sects are kuffar or innovators too. I mean, if you're Salafi, you should only study Salafism. And yes, you will do certain things. You will get an iPhone and so on and so forth, but you will never go study Western philosophy or Eastern philosophy, or because it is all beyond the pale. Whereas I believe we should revive the idea that God has given humanity revelation to guide humanity, but also God has given every human being a conscience and reason. That was the point in Hay ibn Yaqzan. You know, one of the opening chapter of my book is the story of Hay ibn Yaqzan. It was this novel written by Ibn Tufail, who was the teacher of Ibn Rushd, or teacher, or let's say the master. I mean, he brought Ibn Rushd to the palace to write the books of Aristotle. He was a pioneer of Ibn Rushd's ideas. The book is about this man living on an island, using his reason and empirical skills to discover how life works and how there must be a creator, and how he brings ethics by himself, develops. So one lone person, without any input from an imam or a sheikh or any revelation, he uses his reason to come to conclusions that religion also teaches. So it's not against religion, but with reason you come to values that are also told to you from religion. So you need both of these sources of wisdom. That's what Ibn Rushd is telling us about. Ibn Rushd was a qadi, he was a scholar, he was a judge, he was an interpreter of the Sharia, he was a faqih, and he also was a great scholar of Aristotle. And in my book, I show that some of his insights from philosophy influenced the way he interpreted jurisprudence, especially on women's issues, for example, or on matters of jihad. So I think we need to open up that idea that, you know, we Muslims should re-engage with the world, re-engage with each other in the first place, saying that, you know, the Shia are kafir, or, you know, or heretics, so we should suppress them. Learn Shia Islam. See why Shia Muslims are thinking differently about the history of the early Islamic political history. And then you will understand maybe, you know, why there's a Shia tradition. Maybe there are some good Shia scholars who will teach you something. The same thing is true for Shiites who don't want to value Sunni tradition. So let's open up and learn about the contributions of the Japanese or scholars. Or we Muslims are so critical of Orientalists, right? I mean, it's widespread. I mean, Orientals are generally seen as bad people. These are Westerners who come to study Islam, and some Orientals were certainly prejudiced, not all of them. The question is, why don't we have scholars who study Christianity or Judaism as good as the Christian and Jewish scholars do? Well, because we didn't show interest to those. I think it's that opening up that means we need more a universalistic education, humanities. We need, in our religious teachings, more open-minded approach to other religious traditions, other cultures. And it's not going to happen, but we should start, because we're with this cocoon, we really close ourselves to anything that is beyond ourselves. And And when you do that, inevitably you will regress. And that's what Ibn Rushd was warning us, as I showed in my book. How we can bring these ideas of Ibn Rushd to the Awam in Indonesia? Much of the ideas of Ibn Rushd are complex. Some of them are outdated. It's not necessary in terms of how Aristotle defined the cosmos. But we can distill them to the common people in an accessible way, which is what I tried to do in my book. So actually, maybe you could translate my book in Indonesian and try to bring some attention to it. It's just a humble suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Pak Akyol, ya, Pak Mustafa Akyol. I just raise one little question for you, because you mentioned about Ibn Rushd and also talk a lot about women, and you mentioned about that women imam. And what is your opinion about women imam for adult male, for mixed group? Is that okay?
I'm not a mufti, so I'm not going to give you a fatwa on that. But if you ask my humble opinion as an individual Muslim, I think that is totally okay.
Oh, okay.
That is totally okay. There's only one question about the physicality of things. But, I mean, that is a problem if you only think it's a problem and if you have that obsession. Otherwise, I mean, I think women have the same, certainly, mental, ethical capacity with men, sometimes much more, obviously. So I don't see any limitation on women. Women should be judges and heads of state and presidents and muftis and anything. I mean, there are some physical differences, obviously, between a man and a woman, which is there. I'm not going to deny that. So some egalitarians come to the point of denying those differences. I'm not going to do that. But in terms of their intellectual capacities and their ethical values, the idea that women are somehow inferior than men, I don't buy that at all. I don't accept it at all.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Thank you very much. I'm as a Muslim feminist, we talk a lot about this kind of issue, and we discussed it in early 2000, 24 years ago. And in Muhammadiyah, we already discussed in Fatwa Council in Tarji, and it will be soon be issued the idea that women can be lead or to be imam for adult men. So I think that's very, very happy to hear that. Okay, from other speaker, would you please to respond? We still have 5 more minutes. Pak Muhamad Ali, mau merespon?
Just a little bit. I think all the questions have been responded by Mustafa Akyol, and just a specific question for me about how would you bring the ideas of Ibn Rushd to the Awam of Indonesia. Ibn Rushd was a philosopher, but he was actually not trained as philosopher. He was trained as a judge. His family was judges, and he became a judge. And he also a physician to the caliph. So, you can be multi-talented and multi-disciplinary in a way, although it is more difficult now than at that time to be interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. So now you have a specialization, right? You are a philosopher or you are a preacher, for example. Either you are an academic or you are an intellectual, public intellectual, journalist and so on. So there is more specialization now. But I think Ibn Rushd has written something about philosophy. At the same time, he also wrote a legal book, Bidayatul Mujtahid, right? Bidayatul Mujtahid is also for the awam. So although, I think one characteristic of Bidayatul Mujtahid is that it compares and contrasts different legal thoughts. At least you have a comparative muqaranatul madhahib, right? At least you can teach the people. It's not only the Shafi'i that is there. There is a Hanafi, Maliki, Hanbali, and others as well. So I think that's one way is to give people the awam comparative thinking, the way to compare. You know, okay, we are traditional. We, in a way, we do our either kunut or without kunut, or whether we put our hand on our body or not. You know, that's kind of very simple thing in ritual. But there's more than that. Law is more than that. There's universal law. According to Ibn Rushd, there are two laws: universal law and particular laws. So particular laws are laws that are very specific in time and place. Like, for example, laws in Indonesia are different from laws in United States, for example, right? So there's a specific laws and constitution and bylaws in different countries. So we tell the people about that, you know, different, even in Indonesia, in Aceh, in West Java, in Makassar, there's some specific local laws, right? So that's a particular laws. But then you also have universal laws. Laws that are universal, that any person, anybody, any human being would have the same understanding. Yes, use common sense, akal sehat. In Indonesia, we talk about akal sehat, common sense. You have to be thankful to your parent, for example, right? You have to thank your benefactor. Ibn Rushd mentioned about thanking benefactor. You know, someone give you, you have to thank, right? You have to thank if someone give you. It doesn't apply to only Muslims. So being thankful is everywhere. So that's one way to teach, you know, to teach about something very, very philosophical. But it can be done with stories, with metaphors, right? With local wisdoms, right? But still, it is about philosophical ideas and about universal laws. Just an example. I think that's it from my part, and thank you.
Thank you, Pak Ali. And also I invite Pak Philip and Bu Nina to give response and also closing remark. 1 minute.
Yeah, very quick. I think to the last question, if I may, what I learned from the book is that these thinkers are brave because they stood up to the arguments, and then they believe what they believe, and they lost their life. Their books were burned and so on, but somehow the thinking survived across centuries. So I think what we need right now is brave people, you know, who are not afraid of stating their thinking in their minds, and then with based on arguments and evidence. I think that's what we need, and this is not this is not specific to Indonesia, but I think this is what we need to do, and universities are the place to do such thing, and then strengthening civil society where we can have public space so that we can discuss. And last thing is that we are living in the digital era. You know, the works of Ibn Rushd and others would be accessible to everybody, you know, not through schools, but from your own laptop, you know, somewhere. And then people would, I think, liberate themselves.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Pak Philip. And right now, Bu Nina, Prof. Nina, please.
Yeah, I have written all the things that I need to say in the chat. I would like to thank you for all, and especially the Auda and the host for this event. I really agree with the argument of Mustafa Akyol, which is written in the book. And well, I hope this can be socialized widely so Islam can Muslim can achieve what in the golden age has achieved. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bu Nina. Pak Komaruddin, would you please also give closing remark?
Well, I'm very happy. I enjoy a lot your discussion. One thing I would emphasize that piety needs freedom. If there is no freedom, there is no piety. And second, that tonight I will ordain Alimah as Al-Imam Al-Kabir or Imamah Al-Kabir. We ordain to be Imam. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pak Komar. Okay, and also would you please give a closing remark, Pak Mustafa Akyol? Yeah. Yes, please,
Okay.
for closing remark. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Sheikh Alimatul Qibtiyah and other shuyukh here, Nina, Philps and Muhamad Ali. And thank you so much, Professor Komaruddin Hidayat. You were kindly the organizer of this event and you reached out. It was an honor, to be on the same panel with you. It was an honor that my book has been shown attention and discussed by really thoughtful scholars, academics, and pious Muslims. It's important, and inshallah, I mean, every generation has its call. As I said, as Muslims in the 21st century, I think we have the duty to care for our religion by sometimes being critical of our community.
Okay,
We
thank you very
criticize
much.
not because we don't. Not because we don't care about Islam. We criticize because we care
love
about
Islam.
faith and
Okay.
the state of our ummah, so we get better. And thanks for being in that effort and hosting this event together. Many thanks to everybody who joined us from Turkey to Indonesia. Many friends. Shukran. And
Okay.
inshallah, let's continue discussing these issues next time in Indonesia. Maybe. Do you have religion,
Inshallah.
please? Is there a
No,
problem?
we don't have
okay,
religion
good.
of belief. So that's why you will not go to the jail for of your different opinion, yeah?
That makes
Only
a
in
big difference.
Aceh we have Wilayatul Hisbah. Only
I'll
in
keep that
Aceh.
in mind. That makes a big
Okay.
difference. Yes.
Sorry, Pak
Okay.
Ali, do you have any closing statement?
Oh, just I think that's all. I
Okay.
really enjoyed this, and I know the challenges are there. So there's so many challenges. How to reopen our minds, right? So we agree there's so much there, but I think small thing makes difference. From our own part, from our own places, our positions, we do what we can do to be always develop a sense of curiosity. I think one of the underlying thing is a sense of curiosity. That our children, our kids, if it is not our generation, at least our kids' generations, that they will embrace more freedom. They will embrace
Okay.
more pluralism. I think that's it. And thank you so much, Mustafa Akyol. It is an honor to be part of this panel.
It's my honor.
Okay,
Here.
thank you very much, everybody. Yeah, I think we already run off time. It's already 10, 5 time more from 10. So I think we have to close our great discussion tonight, or maybe in the morning at US. Hopefully, we could live both in Islamic faith and universal ethic. And we hope by reading this book, we will not lose our universalism or universal ethic, and we will not lose our science and our reason. So let's close together with Hamdalah, Alhamdulillahirabbil Alamin. Again, thank you very much. We are waiting for you, Mr. Mustafa Akyol, to Indonesia. Inshallah, we will have a fruitful discussion here, and no worry with the police religion.